They thought Arabella was nothing more than a beautiful country girl who had come to marry the Duke's heir for his money. At dinner, his Spanish stepmother decided to humiliate her in a language she believed Arabella could never understand. But when Arabella calmly answered her in flawless Spanish, the entire table fell silent. She had been listening to every word, and that was only the beginning. Because the secrets Arabella would uncover inside Ravensmere were far more dangerous than an insult at dinner, and they would reveal why her husband's stepmother had spent years trying to control him. By the time Arabella discovered what really happened to the one person who had protected him as a child, she would realize that she had not married into an ordinary family. She had walked straight into a secret someone had killed to keep buried. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have notifications turned on, because you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's begin. Crispin Harcourt had spent most of his life learning what it meant to be the heir, without ever being allowed to feel like one. His father, Duke Alastair Harcourt, was still very much alive, still ruled Ravensmere, and still made the important decisions concerning the estate. Crispin's future was certain in one respect. One day, the title and its responsibilities would pass to him. But inside his own family, certainty had never meant authority. Ever since his father had married Serafina, Crispin had watched his stepmother find a way to turn almost every weakness into evidence against him. If he questioned an estate decision, she called him inexperienced. If he made one himself and something went wrong, she quietly suggested that he had acted carelessly. Even when he succeeded, she had a way of making someone else seem responsible for the result. She rarely attacked him openly. She did not need to. A few carefully chosen words to Duke Alastair were enough. And Alastair, who should have known his own son better than anyone, had gradually begun accepting Serafina's judgment. There had been one person who refused to do so. Lady Honoria Harcourt, Alastair's mother and Crispin's paternal grandmother, had understood exactly what Serafina was doing. She had defended Crispin whenever she saw him being unfairly blamed, and when he doubted himself, she reminded him that being young did not make him incapable of judgment. She had been the one person in the family who made him feel certain of himself. Then she died. Years had passed since her death, but Crispin still remembered her words more clearly than he remembered many of the conversations he had shared with his father. With Honoria gone, Serafina's influence had become stronger, and now she had found another way to extend it into Crispin's future. She wanted him to marry Genevieve Loxley. Genevieve came from Serafina's own social and family circle. Serafina trusted her manners, her upbringing, and, most importantly, her loyalty. She did not merely want Genevieve to become Crispin's wife because Genevieve was respectable. She wanted a woman inside Crispin's future household who would remain answerable to her. Once Crispin inherited Ravensmere, Serafina could no longer expect to control every decision made within his home. But if Genevieve became his wife, Serafina believed she would always have an ally beside him, someone who would quietly preserve her influence over the future duke. To Alastair, Serafina presented the arrangement as sensible. Genevieve understood aristocratic life. Her family was respectable. She knew what would be expected of a duke's wife. Alastair saw no reason to oppose the match. Crispin saw every reason to refuse it. Serafina pressed him to reconsider. She spoke of responsibility, family expectations, and the importance of choosing a wife who understood the world he would eventually inherit. Crispin listened. Then he declined. Serafina did not accept his answer easily. She returned to the subject more than once, always presenting the proposal as though she were protecting his future rather than controlling it. Crispin finally understood that refusing Genevieve was not enough. He needed to decide what he actually wanted. He found the answer unexpectedly. It began with a woman who did not know who he was. Crispin met Arabella during an ordinary disagreement involving a man who had little power to defend himself. Crispin had become frustrated and spoken to the man with the kind of authority he had been raised to use without thinking. Arabella intervened. She did not know she was speaking to the heir of Ravensmere. She did not know that the man in front of her had been raised to expect obedience. She simply saw a man using his position to make another person uncomfortable, and she told him so. Crispin was stunned. People around him measured every word before speaking. Arabella did not. She told him plainly that rank did not give anyone the right to treat another person without fairness. She walked away without waiting for his approval. Crispin could not forget her. When they encountered one another again, curiosity had already replaced his initial surprise. Their conversations became longer. Arabella remained exactly as she had been that first day, direct, intelligent, and entirely unimpressed by status. Eventually, Crispin told her who he was. Arabella was surprised to learn that the man she had challenged was the Duke's heir, but she did not suddenly become timid. She did not begin flattering him. She simply understood more about the circumstances surrounding the man she had already come to respect. That mattered to Crispin more than he expected. For the first time, he was considering a woman because of what he had personally seen in her, rather than because someone else had decided she was suitable for him. He knew there was no guarantee that affection would become love, so he did not pretend there was. He offered Arabella an honest arrangement. They could marry, build a life based on mutual respect, and allow whatever feelings might develop to come naturally. If she did not want that life, he would not hold her refusal against her. Arabella considered his proposal. Then she accepted. For Crispin, the decision was not an act of rebellion for its own sake. It was the first important choice of his adult life that truly felt like his own. When he returned to Ravensmere and told his family that he would not marry Genevieve Locksley, the room did not erupt. Serafina simply stared at him. Crispin then made his decision unmistakable. He had chosen Arabella. He had chosen the woman who knew him as a man before she knew him as an heir. For years, Serafina had influenced Crispin by making him doubt his own judgment. Now, for the first time, he had made a decision she had not chosen for him. And Serafina understood exactly what that meant. Arabella arrived at Ravensmere knowing that the dinner would be her first formal introduction to the family she was about to join. She knew the house, the title, and the expectations surrounding Crispin, but she had yet to experience the family itself under the same roof. Duke Alastair received her with measured courtesy. Lucan was polite enough, though his attention remained guarded. Crispin stayed close without appearing possessive, quietly aware that every expression and every word would be examined. Then there was Duchess Serafina. From the moment Arabella entered the dining room, Serafina studied her with the careful attention of a woman assessing something she intended to control. Arabella was young, beautiful. Her family lacked the aristocratic connections Serafina considered necessary for the wife of a future duke. To Serafina, that made the situation simple. Arabella might have captured Crispin's attention, but she could still be taught her place. Arabella, meanwhile, had already noticed something about Serafina. She knew the Duchess had been born in Spain. Arabella herself had spent part of her childhood with her aunt in Spain, and during those years she had learned Spanish fluently. She had never mentioned it to anyone in the Harcourt family. There had been no reason to, until now. As dinner progressed, Serafina's manner toward her became increasingly patronizing. She asked questions that sounded courteous but carried judgment beneath them. She examined Arabella's answers as though searching for evidence that she did not belong. Arabella remained composed. Then Serafina deliberately changed languages. She turned directly toward Arabella and began speaking Spanish. She believed the language would put Arabella at a disadvantage. To Serafina, Spanish was part of her own identity, something she could use to establish superiority over a young woman she considered socially beneath her. She assumed Arabella would hear unfamiliar words and understand nothing, so she spoke freely. She told Arabella that having a pretty face did not make her suitable for an heir. She questioned the girl's upbringing and suggested that women from modest country families could easily mistake a wealthy marriage for an opportunity. Then her criticism became more personal. She told Arabella that Crispin was too inexperienced to understand what a woman in her position might truly want from him. Arabella listened without moving. Across the table, Crispin could not understand the words. Neither could Duke Alastair. Lucan could not follow the conversation either. They could only see that Serafina had deliberately switched languages and was speaking directly to Arabella. Serafina continued. She made it clear that she believed the marriage should be delayed. A proper marriage settlement had to be arranged first, she insisted. The family's interests had to be protected before Arabella could take her place beside Crispin. To Serafina, this was not merely financial caution, it was a warning. She was telling Arabella that entering Ravensmere did not mean she would be allowed to influence Crispin or the family simply because she had won his affection. Arabella let her finish. She did not interrupt. She did not reveal a flicker of surprise. She simply listened to every word. Then Serafina stopped. Arabella looked directly at her and answered in fluent Spanish. "Would you repeat what you just said? I want to make certain I understood you correctly." Serafina went completely still. For the first time that evening, she had no immediate answer. Arabella's voice had remained calm. There was no raised tone, no insult, and no attempt to create a spectacle. That made the reversal more devastating. Serafina had believed she was speaking to a young woman who could not understand her. Instead, Arabella had understood every word. Duke Alastair looked from his wife to Arabella, unable to understand the Spanish but fully aware that something unexpected had just happened. Crispin was equally unable to understand what Arabella had said, but he understood the expressions. He saw Serafina's confidence disappear. He saw Arabella remain perfectly composed. And he understood something that mattered far more to him than the words themselves. Arabella was not intimidated by his stepmother. For most of his life, Crispin had watched people become cautious around Serafina. He had watched servants choose their words carefully. He had watched his father allow her opinions to carry more weight than his own. Even he had learned to measure his responses whenever she challenged him. Arabella had done none of that. She had simply stood her ground, and Crispin was genuinely thrilled. It wasn't because Arabella spoke Spanish. It wasn't even because she had embarrassed Serafina. It was because, in a single moment, she had shown him something he had rarely seen in his own home. Someone could face Serafina without shrinking. Lucan noticed it too. His expression tightened as he watched his mother lose control of the conversation. He understood immediately that Arabella was not going to behave like the obedient wife his mother had imagined for Crispin. Serafina finally recovered enough composure to continue the dinner, but the balance at the table had changed. She had entered the evening believing she was establishing her superiority over a pretty country girl. Instead, she had revealed an assumption that Arabella had never intended to expose. Arabella knew Spanish, and now Serafina understood that the young woman sitting across from her could understand conversations Serafina believed were beyond her reach. For the first time, Serafina had reason to wonder what else Arabella might know that she had never thought to hide. Crispin and Arabella married without pretending that love had arrived with the vows. What they had was enough to begin with: trust, respect, and the freedom to be honest with one another. Marriage brought them closer in ways neither had expected. Their conversations became easier. They laughed more. They disagreed without fearing that an argument would damage what they had built. Then, gradually, affection became something deeper. Crispin began to love the peace he found in Arabella's presence. Arabella began to love the man beneath the title, the man who had spent years being made to doubt himself by the people closest to him. One evening, Crispin told her about his childhood. He spoke about his mother, whose death had left him young and vulnerable to Serafina's influence. Then he spoke about Lady Honoria, his paternal grandmother, who had always defended him. "She was the only one who never made me feel as though I was a disappointment," he said. Arabella understood why losing her had affected him so deeply. She did not try to give him an easy answer. She simply stayed beside him. By then, Serafina had begun noticing how much Crispin had changed. He no longer looked to her before making every important decision. He was becoming more confident in his own judgment, and Arabella had become the person he trusted when he needed an honest opinion. Lucan noticed the change as well. Serafina had wanted Genevieve Loxley as Crispin's wife, because Genevieve belonged to her own circle and would have helped preserve Serafina's influence over Crispin's future household. Crispin had rejected that plan. Now Arabella occupied the place Serafina had intended for someone else, and she could not control her. One evening, Serafina spoke privately with Lucan. "She is changing him," she said. Lucan knew exactly what she meant. Serafina's expression hardened. "Arabella is not merely an unsuitable bride." She paused. "She is an obstacle to everything we have spent years building." By the time Arabella had settled into Ravensmere, she had begun learning the practical workings of the household alongside Crispin. She was not the Duchess, and she had no authority to examine whatever she pleased. But as Crispin's wife and the future mistress of the estate, she was gradually becoming familiar with the correspondence and records he was expected to understand as the heir. One afternoon, they were sorting through older family correspondence when Arabella noticed a small bundle that had been filed among the estate papers. One letter was written in Spanish. Crispin handed it to her without hesitation. "I suppose this one is yours." Arabella read it. Her expression changed. The letter came from an apothecary who had supplied medicine to Ravensmere around the time of Lady Honoria's final illness. More troubling was the reference to the person who had requested the preparation, Serafina. Arabella read the passage again to make certain she had understood it correctly. The letter did not accuse Serafina of anything. It simply recorded that the medicine had been supplied at her request. That alone was not proof of wrongdoing. Arabella knew that. So she did not tell Crispin that she had discovered evidence of murder. Instead, she began checking. She traced the apothecary's name through the older household accounts and found the corresponding entry. The date matched the period of Honoria's final illness. Then she compared the medicine recorded by the apothecary with the treatment the family had always believed Honoria had received. They did not match. Arabella continued through the household records until she found another entry that made her stop. Shortly before Honoria's death, Serafina had personally taken control of her medicines. Arabella returned to Crispin with the records. He read them slowly. The color left his face. "My grandmother," Arabella nodded. "I don't know what it means yet." Crispin stared at the papers. For years, he had believed Honoria died from illness. She had been old enough for sickness to be believable, and nothing had ever given him reason to question it. Now, for the first time, there was a reason. His first instinct was not to accuse Serafina. It was to reject the possibility altogether. She wouldn't have done that. Arabella looked at him. "I don't know that she did." Crispin looked back at the records. Arabella placed the Spanish letter beside them. "Then help me prove that I am wrong." He remained silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. For the first time, the question surrounding Lady Honoria's death was no longer Arabella's concern alone. It belonged to both of them. Crispin and Arabella began with the records they already had. Arabella followed the Spanish correspondence and the apothecary's records. Crispin went through the older household papers, looking for anything that could establish who had been present at Ravensmere during Lady Honoria's final illness. They soon found a name that had been missing from the family's account of those days: an elderly former housemaid, Mrs. Elspeth Ward, had left Ravensmere years ago and was still living in a nearby village. The old household records showed that she had been working there when Honoria died. Crispin went to see her. Elspeth remembered Serafina taking charge of Honoria's care shortly before her death. Until then, the old lady's medicines had been handled by her usual attendants. Serafina had suddenly dismissed one of them from the sick room and insisted that only people she trusted should administer the medicine. Elspeth remembered something else. The dismissed servant had protested that the arrangement was unusual. She was never allowed back into Honoria's room. Arabella checked that memory against the apothecary's records. The medicine supplied to Ravensmere had been altered shortly before Honoria's condition deteriorated. The change had been authorized through Serafina, and the timing matched the period when she had taken control of Honoria's care. It was still circumstantial, but the pieces were beginning to fit. Then Crispin found something worse. An old household record placed Lucan at Ravensmere during the final days of Honoria's illness. That contradicted what Lucan had told the family for years. He had claimed he was away. Arabella found a second record confirming his presence, an entry showing that he had received something at the estate during precisely the period he claimed not to have been there. Crispin confronted him. Lucan immediately denied it. He insisted the record must have been mistaken. Crispin placed the documents before him. "You were here." Lucan said nothing. "You told me you were away." Still nothing. Arabella watched him carefully. Lucan finally admitted that he had been at Ravensmere, but he insisted that he had not harmed Honoria. Crispin's voice hardened. "Then tell me what you did know." Lucan looked away. The silence answered before he did. His mother had told him that Honoria had become a problem. Honoria had begun challenging Serafina's influence over Crispin. She had threatened to speak to Alastair about the way his son was being treated, and had made it clear that she intended to protect Crispin from further manipulation. Lucan had known about it. He had also known that his mother intended to remove the problem. He had not administered the medicine himself. But when Honoria became ill, he helped his mother keep the household servants away from the sick room. After her death, he helped maintain the story that she had died naturally. Crispin stared at his brother in disbelief. "You knew?" Lucan could barely meet his eyes. "Yes." The word broke something inside Crispin. For years, he had remembered his grandmother's death as the moment he lost the person who had protected him. Now he understood that she had not simply died. She had been deliberately removed because she stood between Serafina and the control she wanted over him. And Lucan had known. Crispin left the room unable to speak. Arabella found him alone. The grief that followed was not quiet. He wept for the grandmother who had believed in him, for the years he had spent mourning her without knowing the truth, and for the realization that the woman responsible had remained inside his family all along. Arabella stayed beside him. She did not tell him to forgive. She did not tell him to be strong. She simply remained there while the truth finally settled into him. Eventually, there was only one person who had to hear it: Duke Alastair. Crispin and Arabella brought him the evidence themselves: the Spanish letter, the apothecary records, the household records, the testimony concerning Serafina's control of Honoria's care, and finally, Lucan's admission. Alastair read through the evidence in silence. Then he looked at Crispin. "My mother," Crispin nodded. For a moment, Alastair seemed unable to breathe. His mother had died years ago, but the truth struck him as though the loss had happened that morning. Then came the realization that devastated him even further. Serafina had not only killed his mother, She had manipulated him into helping her succeed. Every time he had dismissed Crispin's concerns, every time he had accepted Serafina's judgment over his sons, he had strengthened the very woman who had destroyed his family. Alistair rose. He went to Serafina himself. She knew immediately from his expression that something had changed. "What is this?" she asked. Alistair placed the records before her. His voice was low. "Tell me about my mother's final days." Serafina looked at the papers. For the first time, she understood that the secret she had protected for years was no longer safely buried. She could not undo the evidence. She could not silence Lucan, and she could not control Crispin as she once had, so she reached for the weapon that had served her for years. If she could not destroy the evidence, she would destroy the woman who had found it. Her eyes settled on Arabella. And Serafina began looking for a way to make Alistair doubt his daughter-in-law instead. Serafina did not wait for Alistair to question her. She attacked first. She told him Arabella had manipulated Crispin from the beginning. She called her ambitious and claimed that her real objective was control of Ravensmere through her husband. "She has turned him against you," Serafina insisted. "She wants him to believe that I am his enemy. For years, words like those might have been enough. Not now. The evidence lay between them." Crispin stepped forward. He did not ask his father to believe him. He simply told him what he had found. He explained the Spanish letter and how it connected Serafina to the apothecary. He explained the household records, the altered medication, and the testimony of the former servant who remembered Serafina taking control of Honoria's care. Then he told him about Lucan. Alistair listened without interrupting. For the first time, Crispin realized he no longer needed his father's approval to trust his own judgment. When Alistair finally turned to Serafina, his voice was unsteady. "Did you kill my mother?" Serafina denied it. She denied the letter. She denied deliberately changing Honoria's treatment. And when Alistair pressed her about Lucan's presence, she turned on her own son. Lucan stared at her. He had spent years believing that protecting his mother would secure his place in the family. Now he understood that she was prepared to sacrifice him to save herself. He finally told the truth. He admitted that Serafina had involved him in concealing what happened after Honoria became critically ill. He admitted that he had lied about being at Ravensmere and had helped keep the servants away from the sick room. Alistair closed his eyes. The truth came together with unbearable clarity. Serafina had not merely deceived him about his mother. She had spent years teaching him to distrust his own son. Every accusation he had accepted, every time he had dismissed Crispin, every occasion when he had allowed Serafina's judgment to outweigh his son's. He finally understood that the woman he trusted had been manipulating him, while the woman he should have protected had been trying to protect Crispin. His mother's death had been hidden from him, and he had helped the person responsible remain in control of his family. Alistair's composure broke. He turned away, unable to hide the grief and shame on his face. But there was no returning to the old order. Serafina's authority within Ravensmere was removed, and the evidence concerning Honoria's death was placed in the hands of the proper legal authorities. Lucan, having admitted his own involvement in concealing the crime, would have to answer for his part in it. Crispin remained the heir. Nothing about his title had changed. But something inside him had. He no longer stood before his father waiting to be told whether his judgment could be trusted. Arabella came to his side. Neither needed to say what the other already understood. They had entered the confrontation together. They left it together. The house had finally grown quiet. For the first time since Arabella had entered Ravensmere, there was no pressure waiting behind every closed door, no carefully chosen opinion hanging over Crispin's shoulder, and no voice reminding him what he was expected to become. He and Arabella were alone. Crispin looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "When we married, I wasn't certain I would ever love you." Arabella smiled faintly. Neither was I. There was no bitterness in either admission. They had never needed to pretend that their marriage began as a great romance. It had begun with two people making a choice they believed they could live with. But somewhere along the way, that choice had become something neither of them had expected. Trust had come first. Then friendship. Then a love strong enough to survive everything that had tried to stand between them. Crispin reached for her hand. "All my life, someone has wanted something from me," he said. "My father wanted me to become the man he thought I should be. Serafina wanted me to become useful to her. My family wanted me to protect its name." He looked down at their joined hands. "You never asked me for any of that." Arabella shook her head. "I only wanted you to be yourself." That was what made him smile. She had never needed the title to value him. She had never needed his inheritance to choose him. And when everything he had believed about his family had collapsed, she had remained beside him. The household Serafina had fought so hard to control had slipped beyond her grasp. The position she had spent years preparing for Lucan had disappeared with it. The influence she had built so carefully had collapsed before her, leaving nothing of the future she had planned. But Crispin and Arabella had not lost what mattered. They had gained something that could not be arranged, inherited, or controlled: each other. Crispin drew Arabella closer. Their kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, carrying none of the urgency of a new romance. It was the tenderness of two people who had already endured enough together to know exactly what they meant to one another. Arabella rested her hand against his chest. Crispin kissed her again, and this time neither of them held back the affection they had spent months discovering. When they finally parted, Arabella remained close to him. Crispin rested his forehead against hers. "I think," he whispered, "I finally know what it means to choose my own life." Arabella smiled. "And I think we already did." They remained together in the quiet, no longer bound by anyone else's plans for them. Their future would not be determined by Serafina's ambitions. It would not be shaped by the expectations of a family that had spent years deciding who Crispin should become. It would belong to them. They had chosen each other. And sometimes, that was the greatest inheritance two people could receive. For a while, life at Ravensmere settled into a peace neither of them had known before. Then several weeks later, Arabella began noticing small changes in herself. At first, she dismissed them: the tiredness, the sudden dislike of foods she had always enjoyed, the strange sensation that left her standing quietly in the middle of a room, wondering why she felt unlike herself. Eventually, she could no longer ignore it. When the physician confirmed that she was with child, Arabella sat in stunned silence. When Crispin heard the news, he was speechless for a moment before pulling her into his arms, overwhelmed with happiness. But there was someone else who needed to hear it. When Duke Alastair learned that he was going to become a grandfather, his eyes filled with emotion. For the first time in years, he looked at his son without the influence of anyone standing between them. "I owe you an apology," he told Crispin. "I should have trusted you. I should have protected you, and I should have listened to my mother when she tried to warn me." Crispin said nothing for a moment. Then he embraced his father. There was no undoing the years they had lost, but there was finally a chance to stop losing anymore. Later, Crispin found Arabella waiting for him. He took her hand. Their marriage had begun as an arrangement. It had become friendship, then trust, and finally love. They had not inherited their happiness. They had chosen it. And now they were preparing to welcome a child into a life they would build together. Sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating the people who tried to control your life. It is becoming free enough to choose your own. What do you think Crispin should do now that his family has been torn apart and a child is on the way? Would you forgive the father who failed you, or would you keep your distance? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed Arabella and Crispin's story, subscribe for the next one.